Monitoring. When students are engaged in doing an activity, whether talking or reading or writing, whatever, what should you, the teacher, then do? Well, perhaps you could go to sleep or work on your high score, but another alternative, and what you really should be doing, is monitoring. So, what is monitoring? Monitoring. What is monitoring? Well, of course, monitoring is to monitor, to oversee, to overlook, to surveil your students, in this case, and to check what they're doing against a given set of criteria. So, first question really is when to monitor. Well, the first critical time to monitor is immediately the activity starts. So the stopwatch starts going, and you must immediately go around the different groups and check to make sure that they have understood the instructions, and you know that when they do the activity that they're supposed to be doing in the way that they're supposed to do it. So first things first in monitoring, do it immediately the activity starts, and discreetly check all groups to see if they're doing what they ought to be doing in the way they ought to be doing it. As time progresses in the activity, you will also need to continue monitoring. Now, if the activity is proceeding well, everything is flowing, after you discreetly monitor to see what's happening, well, for you to then call over and monitor interrupting, making suggestions, this will be detrimental to learning. So in some cases, be very discreet, but don't actively monitor. And in the circumstances where the activity is proceeding well. However, with more difficult activities, where either you find that the students are having questions or are just plain stuck, then you're better served by physically calling over and making suggestions and so on, and more actively monitoring. So be aware that too much monitoring is not helpful. Be aware that you should be monitoring in the course of the activity. But if people do have difficulties or questions, then you know that it's time for you to go over and more actively monitor the situation. There are more than one way to monitor. One way of monitoring is really almost not to monitor, to be invisible. So you can take yourself to the back of the room, to somewhere where you're out of eyeshot, and you relax. You do something else for 2 minutes, keeping one eye half opened to see what's happening in the class. So if you have said that students must do this on their own, and if you know the class well enough, you can certainly benefit the learning experience by becoming invisible with one half eye open, or even, if you're allowed to, if you think it's beneficial, even leaving the room. So one way of monitoring is being invisible. Another way to monitor is to do so discreetly. So you will, while the class is engaged in conversation, for example, discreetly come along and monitor, see what's happening, listen, maybe crouch down to the table if necessary, but be discreet. And if and when somebody asks a question, you respond to that question and immediately withdraw to monitor to somewhere else, or to monitor another group, sending a signal that you are available but want students, if possible, to work things out by themselves. Another approach to monitoring is to monitor actively. Like when you're discreet, you will of course listen and observe all the groups, and when a student asks a question, you will be happy to respond. But instead of then withdrawing, you might make further suggestions, and you might even correct grammar, correct lexis being used, suggest upgrades to language. So active monitoring is another way to monitor. It's a little bit more involved than discrete monitoring. To actively make suggestions and make corrections, as well as answering the questions and observing. Another approach to monitoring is a little bit like number one. It's almost not monitoring at all, and that is participation. You can actually take your chair, sit down at the table, and join the group. Now, during one activity, you may and should be a participant in each of the groups. Now, this is especially the case when exercises are difficult, too difficult perhaps to do autonomously, and of course this is especially suitable to less able learners, and you will of course know the less able learners in your class. So participation is an alternative, and of course when you're participating you will also have your eye half open to see the rest of the groups, to see if there are any immediate needs, any immediate questions, any immediate problems which need resolved. So participation is also a form, if you will, of. Go to lrnteach.com/TEFL.